The idea of an anime-style Souls-like releases plenty of good chemicals in my brain, but the first Code Vein back in 2019 turned out to be just okay in my book. Like a number of Bandai Namco's original IP, I was intrigued to see that idea get another shot, which made me optimistic for Code Vein 2. However, with a middling execution of its open world and inconsistent gameplay qualities, this sequel doesn't necessarily improve upon its predecessor and instead struggles to stand out in a somewhat saturated genre. Its story premise still compelled me enough through the 50 hours I spent to finish the main quest and all of the side content at least, but that time came with a lot of ups and downs. Coming off of From Software's Elden Ring not too long ago, which Bandai Namco published, pulling up the map to Code Vein 2 had me intimidated and enticed in equal measure. But a few hours after its opening act, I was able to grasp its cadence and scale, which thankfully wasn't as overwhelming as I initially thought. A big part of what pulled me in was its concept, a time-traveling story where you repair a post-apocalyptic present by going to the past to change the outcomes of pivotal moments in its history. Having an open world that subtly changes between timelines drives home a sense of place and the feeling that your character's actions have an impact, even if you're simply following your quest objectives. You see the land itself transform upon completing the prologue's quest, and it's a strong moment that shows promise for the road ahead.
I'm curious what else has changed since we altered history.
However, its storytelling style sells itself short with key moments for its major characters relegated to barren, dreamlike visions.
Jose's cooking her specialty seafood cuisine.
Wait, could this be the sunken city of old?
Vague dialogue gets overlaid as you stand there waiting for the next set of static character models to appear.
Because I've lost control so many times already. I'm terrified of hurting you, sis.
So it's hard to get a real gauge of what's happening or feel the gravity of the situations the story is trying to portray.
I'm sorry. Maintaining the link. It requires more energy than I thought.
It's evident in other dialogue sequences that the writing in Code Vein 2 is rather generic and missing the kind of personality that would draw me in to care about the world I'm supposed to be fighting for.
So long. If I get out of this one alive, let's do this again.
The rare fully animated cutscenes that tee up certain battles do show potential and had me hyped for the moment, but that momentum doesn't last long enough. I do like a handful of the star characters. For example, Lou, being the frail girl who has the time-traveling power, is an extension of your created silent protagonist, and she carries a convincing sense of sorrow.
I was actually quite nervous, this being my first time jump and all.
The three heroes you join in past timelines have fitting backgrounds and are nice to team up with too. Holly is a standout for her story as a gifted doctor put in tragic situations because it's one of the few times Code Vein 2 hits a genuine emotional note.
With it, you can call me to your side anytime.
And it's actually the timeline-shifting side quests that were more compelling parts since they let these characters shine a bit brighter and put their camaraderie into perspective.
I'll stop them even if it kills me! You get out of here!
As a whole, though, I wanted to care more about the broader struggle between revenants and humans and the dynamics that led to so much conflict and the monsters that roamed the land. But the plot threads run shallow and the way they're delivered feels underdeveloped. And as a consequence, I came away from its conclusion fairly underwhelmed, even as it tried to pull on my heartstrings, since I wasn't quite as invested as it seemed to hope I would be. I do think the open world serves its purpose as a vehicle for giving the story some impact. It struck a chord with me to visit a particular location in the before times, seeing where people struggled to eke out an existence, and then that same place dilapidated in the present. The differences aren't drastic from a gameplay standpoint, but it's visually effective for showing the lifelessness of the present day. Navigating the open world is sometimes a pain. You get a motorbike to drive around, and it controls like a flimsy RC car. You can glide in the air by deploying its wings, only to be met with a few invisible walls blocking you from entering parts of the map that are clearly accessible. You just have to enter from where you're supposed to. And certain falls that just don't seem like a problem result in automatic death. These seem like minor inconveniences, but they compound with several other ways that Code Vein 2 seems sloppy.
I'm glad you're alright. Just be sure to tell me if anything feels off.
Some of the vistas are quite impressive on a macro level, but the closer you get to the details, the more you see how muddy everything looks. It's quite jarring, especially as nearly every cutscene would constantly load textures in and out every time the camera cuts to a different angle. And even playing on a PS5 Pro with performance priority mode on, the frame rate fluctuates wildly and oftentimes not even when the action gets hot. As for the open world itself, there isn't much mystery or intrinsic reward to exploration, although once you understand what certain landmarks entail, you'll find critical upgrades for your healing item, materials for weapon upgrades, and persistent stat buffs for specific regions. You're not left completely empty-handed, just don't expect to stumble upon interesting dungeons, bosses, or rabbit holes that evoke your curiosity. I am glad that the open world is trim rather than being padded out with a bunch of checklist objectives, and important quests are clearly delineated in your quest log. Much like my sentiments about the story and open world, Code Vein 2's combat bounces around in quality. It uses the design principles of Soul-style games, and while I've experienced a bit of fatigue, I still lock in once I pick up what it's putting down and begin to understand its systems. Although I wouldn't compare them to my favorites like Bloodborne, Sekiro, or Lies of P, there were times in Code Vein 2 where I felt close to the highs that I got from other games in the genre. A couple of bosses feature creative mechanics that are super tough but fair, conquerable by fully focusing on reading their attack patterns and seizing the rare opportunities you get to strike back. But more often, you get bosses who are either pushovers or frustrating in ways that bring out the worst in Code Vein 2's faults. Having played so many Souls-likes at this point, I'm familiar with how the best ones really nail the tough but fair design philosophy. Code Vein 2 is not one of them. Part of that comes from when it doesn't play by its own rules. Like being hittable while recovering, as your invincibility window is just a few frames shorter than when you're able to actually move again. Or how a damage over time attack sometimes stops if you get hit even when the ability has been fully deployed. Or how the camera just doesn't know what to do when you're smothered and shoved into a corner by a boss that's 10 times your size. Or just hitboxes that don't really make sense for the space that a character model occupies. There are ways around these things, as I was eventually able to defeat every optional and main boss I encountered, but it's dejecting when a game betrays those fundamentals. While some of its systems seem incomprehensible or convoluted upon first impression, it's simpler than it presents itself to be. Instead of pumping points into stats, blood codes dictate your build and what you're capable of in combat. Major characters you meet offer an equipable blood code, and you can think of these as a way to respec whenever you want, as they offer emphasis on certain stats that will then modify the effectiveness of the weapons and gear you use. You get several tools to work with as well. You can summon one of the story characters to join you, which is effective for tougher battles since their attacks can draw aggro to give you room to breathe or go for a big hit. And you can merge with them on the fly for some noticeable buffs, with the trade-off being that you're solo in combat. They also temporarily sacrifice themselves to revive you if you die, which is clutch for alleviating frustrating deaths. Ichor is the mana of Code Vein that lets you cast spells and use abilities that are necessary for diversifying your combat approach. The way ichor feeds back to you when you use your super weapon, called a jail, led to me cycling through my capabilities for harder fights rather than relying on a single tactic or cheese. With the setup that I liked and some alternatives in case I needed to switch it up for different fights, I got into a groove with Code Vein 2's own brand of action RPG combat. The foundation for great combat is clearly here, I just don't think it offers enough interesting opportunities to make the most of its systems. The dungeons throughout the world get woefully repetitive and enemies can be a real cakewalk. You'll be punished if you're not careful, of course, but the imbalance is felt when you go for long stretches of mowing down through fodder mindlessly. You'll also come across a lot of repeat bosses, and at a certain point, they too can be conquered with ease. There are at least cases where harder versions of previous bosses show up in the critical side quests, and a few of those remix familiar attack patterns or throw in new, demanding phases. At times, I was saying to myself, hell yeah, this is the good stuff. However, once I looked back after burning through the final dungeon, it felt like Code Vein 2 just didn't have enough tricks up its sleeve or the sharpness to sustain itself in a consistently engaging way. Code Vein 2 struggles to maintain a lot of the momentum it manages to build up, which is to say, it does have the sauce at times. The story has some bright spots and neat character moments, and the concept of repairing a broken world by changing its past through time travel drew me in, despite the clear shortcomings along the path to seeing its full conclusion. While Souls-like combat demands precision and sharpness from its players, it also requires those things from the game itself, and unfortunately, Code Vein 2 betrays those fundamentals too often. The genre has evolved significantly since the original Code Vein, and even after shifting to an open world, it's unfortunate the sequel hasn't quite kept up.
Reviews editor Tom Marks here with Michael Higham to talk about his review of Code Vein and his tastes around the genre and that sort of thing. You've definitely seen Michael around in the action space. You reviewed Final Fantasy VII Rebirth recently. Clair Obscur is turn-based, but with a little bit of action stuff. But then beyond that, Ghost of Yotei, South of Midnight, lots of different things. Most recently, Octopath Traveler 0, which definitely isn't action, but you get around the RPGs, and we love it. First, though, I want to talk to you about your taste with Code Vein 1, why you wanted to review Code Vein 2, because you didn't review Code Vein 1 for us. That was Mike Epstein back in 2020. But you were, you played that game. You're not a stranger to it. So tell me, just real quick, what were your thoughts on the first one in relation to this?
The idea of an anime-styled Souls game was extremely attractive to me. And in 2019, when we started to see the genre a lot more frequently, other people outside of From Software doing Souls games or Soul-style games. And so when Bandai Namco jumped in and said, hey, we're going to slap some anime styling on top of it, I'm like, yo, this is kind of the best of both worlds for me, because I've been waiting for that. And it was fine. It wasn't busting down any doors. It wasn't revolutionizing anything. It was just okay, they tried the Souls thing. They were fairly successful. I think they get it. And if they do a second one, they could knock it out of the park. And that's how I feel about a lot of Bandai Namco's original IP. I think Scarlet Nexus definitely comes to mind, where I played this more of a platinum style action game. And I was like, wow, they got some ideas here. It's rough in some spots, but if they do a second one, it could go crazy. And that's how I felt coming into Code Vein 2. But as you see in the review, that, it's by going open world and all this stuff, you open yourself up to many, many other problems. So I'm glad that they revisited Code Vein. I just wish they were a little bit more, it was a little tighter and a little more focused, or I wish it was a better game.
Well, I guess that is sort of the big wish at the end of the day with this, is that. But let's talk about your tastes beyond Code Vein specifically, and just in Souls-like in general, because I think this is the first Souls-like you've reviewed, or at least that we've had a chance to talk about at the end of a review. So what are some of your favorites in the genre? What do you like about the genre? What do you look for in it? That stuff.
The thing that I always want from the genre is fairness and responsive controls. I think those are kind of the two key factors. There are a lot of trappings.
When you lose, it's your fault.
Yes, I want to make sure that the game isn't screwing me over, and there are a handful of times in Code Vein 2 where that was not the case. But with that in mind, I think Sekiro Shadows Die Twice really tapped into something that I wanted from the genre for a long time, and that was extremely responsive controls and aggression. And I think that's also why Bloodborne is still currently my favorite in the genre, is because that game is centered around being aggressive, playing aggressively, and not kind of hunkering down in defense as a crutch. It's no, you go get that boss, go get the enemy, and it's up to you if you can dodge and parry. And so, but you need to have tight controls, and you need to have something that's very responsive and, clean hitboxes. The rules need to be clear in order for that style of game to work really well. And I think the Sekiro and Bloodborne are just I still have very, very vivid memories of being very frustrated, but more of oh, I can't wait to get back in there and maybe make it to the next phase, learn a little bit more about this boss, get back in there, and maybe I can make it out by the skin of my teeth. That's the exciting part about the genre, and I still love that adrenaline rush so much. But I think as you see more and more developers try to go for the Souls, I think a lot of those smaller aspects sometimes get lost in the sauce, and I think that's kind of the thing about Code Vein 2, is that they kind of get it. It's almost there, but these small key details are just missing, and you need those in order to have a really good one in the genre.
Well, let's talk about one other kind of big switch from Code Vein 1 to Code Vein 2, which is, hey, Elden Ring came out, and everyone loves Elden Ring. So
Yeah.
this is now more of an open-y game, open world design, not like maybe strictly speaking open world, right, in the way like Witcher or whatever is, but more open. And then the first game was more linear. And so I want to know kind of, what do you prefer in that? Because we see that across a lot of Souls-likes now of Elden Ring went wide. A lot more games are being inspired by Breath of the Wild to some extent of like going wider, where you still had, you know, like Final Fantasy VII Remake was like a very linear game for most of its time and then gave you moments to explore. And then Rebirth was a little more open. Like, where do you land in that? What do you prefer in a game like this?
It doesn't matter how big your game is, it's what you do with it. So the thing about Elden Ring is that it's this big expansive world that emphasizes exploration and the discovery of things on your own. So it feels like the adventure is sort of your own story to tell, and they pack it with so many interesting things, so much mystery and a lot of details within that discovery as well. The thing with Code Vein 2 is that thankfully, it doesn't feel like a checklist. Like, it's not that typical, you know, we're going to pad out the game with a bunch of meaningless side quests. So I will say that, like, Code Vein 2 is very good about showing you, like, hey, these side quests matter, and this is where you find them. So the world isn't, like, super big. When you actually traverse the open world of Code Vein 2, it's not its size isn't untenable. The thing that I am frustrated about is, again, it's kind of breaking its own rules, or breaking the rules of an open world with like invisible walls. Oh, like you can't go here. Oh, if you step here, you automatically die. It's just all these little things that kind of pick away at my enthusiasm for it. So once you kind of understand how to navigate that world, and it's like, all right, it's fine. I know how to get in and around the different quirks of this world. But I think with Code Vein 2, I think its open world is conducive to the story it's trying to tell. I do think that is something that they nailed with this one. They want to tell a story about different regions and how, in the aftermath of a post-apocalypse, how these different regions and the leaders of those fared in the years after. And you can't really do that in this style without doing an open world. So I do understand the direction they went with it, and they did some really interesting things with that. But in terms of gameplay, that's where I think it was kind of missing a lot of pieces to it. So, you know, you see something out in the distance, I want to go to that. That's Breath of the Wild, that's Elden Ring. That's a key part of curiosity in an open world. But something like Code Vein 2, where it's like, oh, you see that thing? You can't actually go there because it's blocked off by X, Y, and Z. Oh, and if I unlock a bike, you ride it around. It could fly too. And it's like, oh, now I could fly in that direction. That means you hit a wall, and it's like, all right, well, it's me, I guess. And so, yeah, it's little things like that are frustrating. But I will say that at least it's not, you know, it doesn't feel like there's a bunch of filler. And so they build this open world. It feels purposeful in some regards. And I think that's what's important if you do an open world.
Makes sense. Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking a little time to chat a little bit more about your review, your tastes, and all that jazz. If you want another chat with Michael, I believe our last one was at Octopath Traveler 0, your review of that. So very, very different kind of game, but we talk a little bit more about your RPG tastes and all that sort of stuff there. And then you can also just check out our original Code Vein review from 2020 if you want to hear what we thought about the first game as well. And for everything else, stick with IGN.